By the time she realized the illegally parked vehicle was a mine, she'd already slapped a neon orange HOA violation sticker across the windshield directly over the words U.S. Department of Homeland Security. The agent didn't say much at first. He just peeled the sticker off, held it up, and said in a voice that could freeze water, "Ma'am, I'm going to need to have a word with you in my office. I'm Jason Harwood. I keep to myself, mow my lawn, and avoid HOA drama like it's toxic waste. Unfortunately, my neighborhood Oakleaf Estates comes with Dolores Tinsley, the kind of HOA president who measures grass height with a ruler and once fined a guy for overly festive Halloween decor. She's the type who wakes up at 5 a.m. just to patrol the streets with her clipboard, hunting for violations like a suburban predator. Her husband, Frank, follows her around like a lost puppy, nodding at everything she says while secretly wishing he could disappear into the golf course. For weeks, Dolores had been on me about non-compliant piercing. My sin, a visiting friend's sedan, sat in my driveway overnight. Not on the street, not blocking anyone, just sitting peacefully in my own driveway. She sent me 3 separate warnings, each escalating in passive-aggressive tone. The first one was polite enough, reminding me of Section 12.4 of the HOA bylaw. The second included highlighted passages and a sticky note that said, "Disappointed in your lack of cooperation." The third was practically a manifesto, complete with photos of my driveway taken at different times of day and a threat to impose daily fines. So, when a black Jeep with tinted windows parked there one morning, she pounced. She didn't bother to ask whose it was. She didn't knock on my door. She just marched up with her clipboard and a violation slip the size of a movie poster. I watched from my kitchen window as she circled the vehicle, like a shark, taking photos from every angle. She even got down on her knees to photograph the license plate, her polyester pants stretching dangerously as she crouched. The problem was, the Jeep belonged to a federal police agent from Homeland Security Investigations. Agent David Sullivan, as I'd later learn, was conducting surveillance in the neighborhood on someone else entirely. He'd asked permission to use my driveway because it gave him the perfect vantage point to monitor a house 3 doors down. I'd agreed immediately, partly because it was my civic duty, and partly because I thought it would be hilarious if Dolores tried to tow a federal vehicle. Dolores, believing herself the supreme law of Oakleaf, slapped the sticker on his windshield with the enthusiasm of someone who just won the lottery. She began taking photos for the violation file, muttering something about finally catching me red-handed. That's when Agent Sullivan stepped out of the vehicle. He was 6 feet 4 inches in tall, built like someone who bench presses small cars for fun, and wearing a tactical vest with Fed DALPOLICE printed across the chest in letters you could read from space. He said in a calm but firm voice, "Ma'am, please step away from the vehicle. You're interfering with official duties." His badge was visible. His credentials were obvious. And any reasonable person would have apologized and walked away. But Dolores wasn't reasonable. She was Dolores. She laughed, actually laughed, and said with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences, "Your badge means nothing here. This is HOA property, and I am the DLI-led president. You're in violation of our parking ordinance, and that vehicle will be towed within the hour if you don't move it immediately." Agent Sullivan's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. He pulled out his phone and made a call. All he said was, "We have a situation at the surveillance point. Civilian interference. Send backup." Dolores took this as a sign of weakness. She started lecturing him about proper procedure, waving her clipboard like a weapon. She even had the audacity to tell him that real law enforcement would understand the importance of community standards. Within 15 minutes, 2 more federal vehicles rolled up. They weren't subtle about it either. Black Suburbs with government plates, tinted windows, and enough antennas to communicate with Mars. Agents poured out like they were responding to a national security threat. They didn't even look at me. They went straight to Dolores. The lead agent, a woman who introduced herself as Special Agent Rivera, explained very calmly that Dolores had tampered with federal property, obstructed an active investigation, and committed vandalism on a government vehicle. The color drained from Dolores's face so fast it was almost impressive. She went from tomato red to ghost white in about 3 seconds. She started stammering about her authority as HOA president, but Agent Rivera cut her off with a raised hand. "Ma'am," she said in a tone that could cut steel, "your HOA rules don't supersede federal law. You've potentially compromised a months-long investigation into interstate fraud and money laundering. The damages from that alone could run into the millions." Dolores's clipboard fell from her hands and clattered on the pavement. She looked around desperately for support, but the neighbors who'd gathered to watch were all recording on their phones. Frank had somehow vanished, probably hiding in their garage. She tried to argue that she didn't know it was a federal vehicle, but Agent Rivera pointed out that ignorance wasn't a defense, especially when Agent Sullivan had identified himself and she'd chosen to ignore him. They didn't arrest her on the spot, which almost disappointed me. Instead, they took her information, photographed everything, including the giant violation sticker she'd used, and informed her she'd be hearing from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Agent Sullivan had to file a report about the interference, which meant paperwork, which meant very annoyed federal agents, which meant Dolores was about to learn what real authority looked like. 3 days later, the HOA held an emergency meeting that Dolores couldn't attend because she was busy being questioned at a federal building downtown. The vice president, a nervous accountant named Gerald Hoffman, ran the meeting with all the confidence of a substitute teacher on their first day. Word had already spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Everyone knew about Dolores versus the feds, and opinions ranged from sympathy, of which there was none, to outright celebration. Gerald read from a prepared statement that the board had received notice of potential legal action against the HOA for the president's unauthorized actions. The association's insurance company was threatening to drop coverage if Dolores remained in a position of authority. Someone in the back shouted that she should be removed immediately. Others applauded. It was the first HOA meeting in 5 years where people actually seemed happy to be there. Meanwhile, I heard from Agent Sullivan that Dolores had been formally charged with obstruction of justice and was looking at fines that would make her sell her prized golf cart, her boat, and possibly her vacation condo in Myrtle Beach. The federal prosecutor was particularly interested in making an example of her, since interfering with federal investigations had become oddly common in suburban neighborhoods. Who knew that KR behavior could rise to the level of federal crime? The best part? The agents finished their operation without ever leaving my driveway. They arrested their suspect 2 days later, a mortgage broker who'd been running a scheme worth $4 million. During the arrest, Agent Sullivan made sure to mention loudly enough for everyone to hear that the operation had nearly been compromised by an overzealous HOA president who thought her clipboard gave her more authority than the federal government. The investigation revealed that Dolores's interference had actually provided evidence of what the agents called unpredictable variables in the neighborhood, which somehow strengthened their case. The irony was delicious. Her attempt to enforce HOA rules had helped the feds build a stronger prosecution. The U.S. Attorney's Office even sent her a thank you note, though I'm pretty sure it was sarcastic. 2 weeks later, the HOA board voted unanimously to remove Dolores from her position. She showed up to the meeting in a designer suit, trying to look professional and in control. But her hands were shaking as she held her notes. She tried to give a speech about her years of dedicated service. But someone interrupted to ask about the $20,000 legal bill the HOA had received for her actions. She couldn't answer. Her voice cracked as she said she was being unfairly targeted. The final tally came down a month later. Dolores was fined $75,000 for obstruction of justice and interfering with the federal investigation. She stood in the courtroom as the judge read the sentence, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. $75,000. Her perfect world of HOA supremacy had cost her more than most people's annual salary. And the look of complete shock on her face was worth every minute of HOA drama I'd endured.